In January 2004, Oasis went into the studio in Cornwall to attempt the recording of their 6th studio album. That album was fully recorded, but then abandoned, and has still not been heard to this day. Over the next year and a half, Oasis battled on until finally completing the album that would become Don't Believe the Truth. But today, I want to tell you the story of the lost album, the one that never made it, the Death in Vegas album. And for what I think might be the first time ever, I want to put forward a theory as to the precise track listing of that album based on a really interesting piece of audio evidence. But before we get into that, let's wind the clock back and set the scene. On the 16th of September 2002, British electronica band Death in Vegas released this, their 3rd studio album, Scorpio Rising, on which Oasis frontman Liam Gallagher sang guest vocals on the title track. Oasis's previous album, Heathen Chemistry, had been self-produced, but for the next one, they wanted to bring someone in. And so, Liam, who'd had a good experience with them, recommended Death in Vegas. Also, over 2003, during the year off, new songs were in development. On May the 3rd, 2003, Noel and Gem performed an impromptu set at the Zanzibar Club Night in Liverpool. And at that gig, they performed the song Stop the Clocks, which was reported as a hint of what the next album was intended to sound like. Stop the clocks and turn the world around. And then in November 2003, it was confirmed that Liam and Noel had met with Tim and Richard from Death in Vegas, that they were on board as producers for the next album to be started in the new year, and also that the band had 13 new songs written for the record. But there was still one other order of business to complete. On, I believe, December the 21st, 2003, frontman Liam Gallagher fired long-standing drummer Alan White after their relationship and Alan's relationship with the band as a whole had seemingly broken down. The band were due to start work in the studio the next month, January 2004, and on the 3rd of January, this appeared in the NME. Noel says the album will be a concise, 10-song psychedelic rock and roll record with no ballads, string sections or self-indulgence. So they had 13 songs, 10 of which would end up on the album, and 3 of which presumably would wind up as B-sides. And in that same article we get a few of the rumoured song titles on the album. Ain't Got Nothing, Stop the Clocks, which will definitely appear on the album, Lord Don't Slow Me Down, Revolution Man, Longer, Singing Your Life, You Wanna Feel My Shame, Say It, and The Good Rebel. So that's 9 songs there, some of which will be familiar and some of which won't be. Ain't Got Nothing eventually came out on the band's 7th album, Dig Out Your Soul. Lord Don't Slow Me Down came out as a standalone single in late 2007. Stop the Clocks, Revolution Song and The Good Rebel came out as Noel Gallagher's High Flying Bird tracks after the Oasis split. And then there are 4 others there, Longer, Singing Your Life, You Wanna Feel My Shame and Say It, which, as far as I'm aware, never did come out. Noel had a clear vision for this album. And in a symbolic move, he decided that they would return to Sawmill Studio in Cornwall, where they had made their debut album, Definitely Maybe, a decade earlier. We worked out that we'd be starting recording 10 years to the day of us starting to record Definitely Maybe, Noel says. We thought, that's it, the stars could not be more aligned. We had this romantic memory of Sawmills being fucking huge, but you always think that the first recording studio you go into is amazing. We kind of walked in and go, it's fucking cold in here. And there was also the question of the drummer.
We parted ways with Alan, and we actually, for the Death in Vegas sessions, we had another friend of ours called Terry Kirkbride, who actually drums on Mucky Fingers on the record. And he drummed on all the stuff in Cornwall. But we'd already asked Zach, would he do the tour? Because our little mate Terry, we love him to bits, but he's a fairly chaotic kind of character, and he, you know, it was not that he's unreliable or anything, but he's the kind of guy that would probably get lost on tour somewhere, you know, in Brazil or somewhere. You'd go out and you never see him again.
This stripped back 10-song psychedelic concept album was meant to be recorded live as well, just as Definitely Maybe was, in the studio, but all the band playing at the same time, rather than the more typical practice of layering up the tracks one by one. Shortly after the sessions started in Cornwall, however, it did become apparent that the stars were not quite as aligned as Noel had hoped.
We had a go at doing this album the Definitely Maybe way. I remember first day walking to the studio in Cornwall, walking down this train track to the studio, and he goes, "Oh, I'm really up for this."
Fast forward 2 weeks, going, I'm f***ing so not up for this.
We tried doing it all, and we did a lot of live takes together, but I think, times had changed, and the sound wasn't happening, and there were a lot of reasons why that didn't work.
That was an excerpt from the Can You See It Now documentary on the Lila DVD single, on which we get to see and hear the band actually in the studio in Cornwall with the producers. And in the background of that documentary, we also get to hear small snatches of the audio from the Sawmill sessions. We hear the B-side, Eyeball Tickler, we hear track 2 from the eventual album, Mucky Fingers, and we also hear a bit of Turn Up the Sun, which would become the opening track. Turn Up the Sun is, in my opinion, the best song Andy Bell ever wrote for Oasis, and it was originally also intended to be the title of the Death in Vegas album.
From the first time I heard it, it was always going to be the opening track on the album. And it was originally going to be the title of the album. I just thought it's a brilliant, brilliant title.
In an interview with the Stage Left podcast in 2017, Gem went into a bit of detail about the Death in Vegas sessions.
What can you tell us about Death in Vegas sessions?
It was a concept, and Noel wanted to go to Sawmills because that's where they recorded a lot of Definitely Maybe, I think.
Right,
and but it's a good idea on paper. But it wasn't right. It was too claustrophobic. We had Terry on drums, and the way Death in Vegas work, Fearless is just a vibe man, but he had an engineer who just seemed to take forever. And we're not the most patient band at all, and it was just too slow. And we felt like we were on the dole, like literally just watching telly all day while he's got something ready to play. So that's why it didn't work out.
How much stuff did you do?
The whole album, I think. I used to have it.
Are there any hidden gems that haven't been heard?
No.
Did any of that stuff get used again then in America? Did you re-record those songs?
We re-recorded stuff, yeah.
You may have noticed there that Gem said something really interesting. There are no unreleased gems. So I reckon we can take from that all the songs they attempted in the Death in Vegas sessions were re-recorded and re-released later on. So let's go to our list. We can now remove those 4 songs with unfamiliar titles. Depending on who you ask, after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month, probably somewhere in the middle, the Death in Vegas sessions ended up being abandoned. Noel said to Mojo, after about 2 weeks, it became apparent we didn't have the songs. Only half an album, really. It was really difficult to have the meeting with Richard and say, we're not taking it any further. Liam was like, you're making me look like a c***, because Richard was his mate. But it was too fucking soon. That was the lowest point. In the end, there was only one track on Don't Believe the Truth that came out more or less unchanged from the Death in Vegas sessions, and that was track 2, Mucky Fingers.
It wasn't on the map of getting tarted up somehow.
No.
It was just
whatever
how that air moved was part of the record.
And so, the Death in Vegas sessions were over, Oasis left Sawmills, and the recordings were consigned to the vault. On the 10th of March 2004, the NME reported, Oasis have finished the sessions with Death in Vegas and have returned to their own studio to continue work on their 6th studio album. Noel revealed, we've done a bunch of really fucking good demos and we put together a running order of what we thought the album was going to be, and we whittled it down to 10 tracks. Gallagher said each remaining member of Oasis is writing for the album, and his brother Liam has written a mega song called Love Is Like a Bomb, so there's another track we can add to the list. And so the band decamped from Cornwall and went back to Noel's studio to continue working on new songs, I believe still with Terry Kirkbride on drums. But really, by all accounts, they were still a bit lost and directionless, and things just weren't coming together.
The first time with Richard and Richard and that from Death in Vegas, we didn't have the songs. You know, we were down in Cornwall and the vibe was great and everybody was getting on, but it kind of transpired that we didn't have the right material. We were only ever halfway through it and thought, the songs aren't right. Then the second time we went to do it, we didn't have a producer, and that caused a bit of friction. And I was kind of left in the producer's chair, which I didn't really want to do from the outset.
Soon enough, the second sessions at Noel's studio had to be called to a halt. Unfortunately, after the recording process, we decided we didn't like anything we had played or recorded during those 3 weeks. And because of commitments with Death in Vegas, Richard Fearless and Tim Holmes couldn't find any more time to give to the project. Attempts to bring the project back under the band's control did not meet with success. It was then decided we would attempt to finish off the record ourselves, which so far has proven quite frustrating and fruitless, Gallagher said. All the while, new songs have been written and old ones have fallen away. So we think the moment for that particular record has passed. More or less everything they'd done up to that point ended up being shelved. The contents of the album and the track listing has never, to my knowledge at least, been made public. Possibly, that is, until today. Do you remember how in different places it was pointed out that this was an album with a theme, a concept album? What was that concept? What was that theme? One of the earliest recordings we have of anything intended for the Death in Vegas album is that live performance with Noel and Gem and possibly actually Terry Kirkbride on percussion playing Stop the Clocks at the Zanzibar Club in Liverpool. Now listen to this right at the beginning.
Our teachers were getting clever.
That was Noel Gallagher retuning his guitar from standard tuning to this slightly different, slightly more unique tuning where he's tuned the B string down to A. So you get E, A, D, G, A, E. I know I can't be the only one who's noticed that for some random reason there's this huge batch of songs, all from this same era, that were written using that guitar tuning. That obviously didn't happen randomly. There was a reason for it, and I've wondered about it for years. And now I wonder if I've cracked it. I wonder if all the songs for that concept album, the Lost Death in Vegas album, were actually written using this tuning. By the end of Don't Believe the Truth, Noel said they had a vast amount of songs written, a total of 66, from the various album sessions. And this is just my theory, but I reckon we could potentially divide the songs up into 3. The ones with Zach Starkey on drums were the re-records that were done in LA. And some of those, like The Importance of Being Idle and Part of the Queue, were ones that Noel had also just written. Of the remaining recordings that have Terry Kirkbride on drums, I think we can divide these into 2 as well. I think the ones that are played in standard tuning, like Lord Don't Slow Me Down, I think all of those were from the second aborted sessions at Noel's studio. And I wonder if the ones that remain, the ones that use that unusual high drop A tuning, are the ones that came from the Death in Vegas album. I think it's entirely possible that this album was meant to have its own unique signature sound, because all the songs would use this specific, different sounding guitar tuning. Here's all the tracks I was able to find that use it. For song 6, I'm going to bring in a somewhat unexpected one. On the deluxe edition of the band's final album, Dig Out Your Soul, as a bonus track, look what we find. Waiting for the Rapture, Alternative Version 2, featuring Terry Kirkbride on drums. Guess what tuning this song's in? E-A-D-G-A-E again. Did you ever wonder why that documentary was called Can You See It Now? Well, that's because another song from these sessions that used that tuning was called Can You See It Now, but this was a Japanese bonus track. It was released only on the Japanese extended version of Don't Believe the Truth. On this song, it's my opinion that the guitars sound like they've been pitch shifted way down from where they started to give them this grungy, sludgy sound, even though they're mostly clean. If I'm right about that, this is how it sounds without the pitch shifting. Song 10 is a song called Don't Stop, which was actually released as a single in 2020. And song 13 is Keep the Dream Alive, and this one is a slightly weird one. You can see Andy Bell actually playing this song on his YouTube channel with no capo, and he's using open shapes. But this was a bit of a puzzle, because no matter what I did, I couldn't get those chord shapes to sound like the intro on the album. Until eventually it clicked. There are two guitars. One is playing the shapes we see Andy play in the video in standard, and another one underneath enriching the sound, playing slightly different shapes in E-A-D-G-A-E. So that's 13 tracks, all from this era, all in that tuning, with Terry Kirkbride on drums. And do you remember how many tracks Noel had said they had on the long list for the album? 13. But looking at those songs, wow, there are some tunes there. And if Stop the Clocks, Revolution Song and The Good Rebel were all considered not strong enough for this album, my word, Noel had some incredibly high standards. The extended version of this video is available for Patreon supporters Tier 2 and up, and if you would be interested in signing up to get exclusive bonus material and to be credited at the end of videos, the link is in the description. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.